Tip number 1, keep it simple. There's way too much going on in this slide. Our title is off-center and runs into the actual text of our story, which also is another thing. Don't put too much wording on the slide as well as too many pictures. There's just way too much going on in the slide. This is a good example of how to keep it simple. One simple picture, your title is centered and is just a brief description of what you're going to talk about in your slide, and then you have bullet points. Rule number 2, use appropriate font size and colors. Make sure you use a good font color that people can see at the back of the room, as well as appropriate colors that people can see. Yellow is probably not a very good idea, as well as like light grays. A lot of people probably can't see that. And then just keep your text consistent. So this is a good way to keep your font size and color appropriate, and as well as things that people at the back of the room as well as the front of the room can see. Which takes us to our next tip of using your PowerPoint as a guide and not as your whole presentation. This is too much wording. People will just be reading your slide instead of paying attention to what you have to say. As far as using your PowerPoint as a guide, if you give yourself a couple of keywords that you can remember your story by, it works much better. Okay, our tip number 4 is to use graphs and pictures to present information in your PowerPoint. This is a lot of information going on with a lot of numbers that you could very easily put into a graph. So here's all the information in the previous slide put into a graph, which makes it much more easy to read and a lot easier on your eyes. Okay, so our tip number 5 is to use keywords. Again, we're going to use the fishing trip example. This is just way too much wording on a slide. So stick to your keywords and keep it simple.
Tip number 6 is to stick to a thing. You need to pick one subject and stick with it. If you will scan down what we have written here, we have everything from the cost of books to a Ninja E. None of this is related. So it is important that you stick to one subject. So purple ponies like to eat beets, and they also like marshmallows from the end of the rainbow. Animation can be fun and it can capture everybody's attention, but it can also be distracting if there's too much movement and too much going on with it. So this animation captured everybody's attention, but it doesn't distract them. Tip number 8, contrasted background. Make sure that you can read this against a background. This is much better. The white shows up on the dark better than the blue on blue. Tip number 9, no more than 2 pictures per slide is suggested. If you have several pictures on one slide, nobody knows where to focus and nobody knows where you're going to go with it. So this is much easier for them to look at and to understand what you're trying for. References. When using pictures or quotes from other websites or references, please list your references. It is a good idea to give credit where credit is due.